South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has congratulated French President Emmanuel Macron on his re-election for a second term in office. In a telephone call this week, Ramaphosa and Macron also discussed other international matters of mutual concern. President Ramaphosa welcomed the offer for material support from France in the aftermath of the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal. At the same time, President Macron pledged his support for international vaccine buyers to procure COVID vaccines for African countries from manufacturers on the continent. The leaders also discussed various initiatives to strengthen relations between the European and African unions. On the Russia-Ukraine conflict, President Ramaphosa reiterated South Africa's stance that it should be resolved through negotiation. So as we mentioned, Emmanuel Macron being sworn in for a second term as President of France. The ceremony included the firing of cannons at the Invalides military complex gardens. Here's a look.
Macron reviewed the troops at LSE Palace Gardens as the French national anthem was played by Republican guards. In a country where presidents rarely get re-elected, Macron won 58.5% of the votes in the second round against the far-right's Marine Le Pen. That's despite strong opposition to his pro-business policies and a proposal to raise the retirement age. In a short speech, Macron spoke of the need to innovate at a time of unprecedented challenges for the world and for France. He said his second term would be new and not merely a continuation of the first. The French president highlighted the threat posed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and global environmental concerns. His second mandate will officially start next Saturday, the 14th of May.
French journalist Pierre Haski is the co-founder of Rue 89, a French news website started by former journalists from the newspaper Liberation. He is following events in that country very closely. He joins us now from Paris to talk a little bit more about the inauguration earlier on. So thanks for joining us, Pierre. Macron sworn in for a second presidential term, as we said. What was the reception like in your mind? What did you observe?
Well, it was a pretty dark event because President Macron's speech was full of crisis. He referred to all the challenges of his second mandate. So it's a very different atmosphere from his first mandate. He referred to the Ukraine war, as you mentioned. He referred to the economic problems that we're having as a result of that war, the inflation that is increasing the prices all over the world. Is referred to the climate crisis and the domestic challenges, the democratic crisis, the social divide that was revealed by the presidential election. So he made the promise that it would be a different mandate, that he would be a different president, that he would change the methods of governing this country. So it was not a joyful event as you would expect from a re-elected president. It was a serious matter of a country in the middle of a tough situation.
All right, we'll take some of those issues that you've raised in bite sizes. So Macron won by 58.5% of the votes in the second round against Marine Le Pen. That's despite strong opposition to his pro-business policies and a proposal to raise the retirement age. So I'm just wondering, how does he intend to pivot? He says that it won't be business as usual. He's going to change how he does things. Was he specific about that?
Well, there are two issues. The first one is that, first of all, he needs to have a majority in parliament. We're going to have parliamentary elections in just 6 weeks, and he has to win them because the country is split at the moment between three blocks. One is the presidential bloc, one is the far right with Mrs. Le Pen, as you mentioned, who was his contender in the second round of the presidential election. And the third bloc is the left-wing bloc, led by Mr. Mélenchon, who is from the radical left. And he has a strong challenge that will be difficult for him to win a majority. And if he doesn't have a majority, he will be really in trouble. So the first hurdle is to win this majority. And the second one is to change the way he's been governing. And France is a very centralized country. and people resent the very top-down approach that he has implemented in his first mandate, so he will have to change that.
Yeah, he in fact said that there's a need to innovate at a time of what he called unprecedented challenges for the world and France. And I quote, he says, "We need to invent a new method together, far from tired traditions and routines, with which we can build a new productive social and ecological contract." As you said, the French are very resentful about the manner in which he's done things. So he's promised to act with respect and consideration. So looking back at his track record, what specifically is he referring to that he's received backlash from, and how do you think he can show greater regard for the electorate?
He's been accused by many people of having centralized power around himself and in a pretty isolated manner in a way. And that's something he's promised to change, that he's trying to decentralize more, to give more responsibilities and power to the regions, to the local communities, rather than everything coming from Paris. And that's one of the important issues on which people are expecting change. And the second thing is obviously the management issue. When you decide that you will have a change in the retirement age, 65 instead of 62, that's the most controversial issue of his second mandate. He will have to negotiate with the unions. He will have to negotiate with the different branches of the economy. And that's something he's promised to do. People are really expecting to see whether he keeps that promise, because if he doesn't, I think there will be a lot of turmoil in the country. But I think the president has learned the lessons from the first mandate, and he will try to implement those promises.
Okay, so let's talk about environmental threats. That's something that he spoke about. What in particular is unique to France in this regard that should also need a change of approach and strategy?
Well, there's a strong push in the population to accelerate the climate fight and to increase the amount of investments in isolation of housing, for example, in the transportation with clean energy. France has one asset, which is its nuclear power. It's got about 2/3 of its electricity from nuclear power, and that's zero carbon emission energy, even if some people are still against nuclear energy, obviously. But there is the promise of increased investments, doubling the investments in climate change in the country, and that's something many people are expecting.
All right. Pierre, you also mentioned earlier on the Ukraine conflict. I'd imagine for a lot of French people this would be an important issue. He received a lot of flack for spending too much time in the mediation role that he played between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm wondering, he's going to be at the helm of the EU. Is he likely to outline any new policy proposals in terms of the highlighted threat that he sees the Russian invasion of Ukraine posing? Is his tone going to change now?
Well, you know, the French president is still, for the next 2 months, the president of the EU. So he will use that time. He's making a big speech, actually, on Monday with his proposals for changing the rules of the EU to adapt to the new environment. But he will try to continue to plead with President Putin and President Zelensky for a peaceful settlement. He has spoken 14 times with President Putin in the past 3 months, and this has led to really no results at all for the moment. But certainly he will try to continue. He has this privileged access. He's the only one in Europe with this privileged access to the Russian president. This has not proved enough until now, but there will come a time when negotiations will be on the table, and the French president will be the one to try to find a negotiated settlement to this terrible war, which is very worrying when you live in Europe, because it's really at the doorstep of the European Union. There's talk of nuclear war. There's talk of invasion or destabilizing of other countries like Moldova. And so the French, like the other Europeans, are very concerned about the situation in Ukraine.
Right, so you mentioned the upcoming June parliamentary vote. Emmanuel Macron, who is he likely to lobby on behalf of? There was speculation, as you mentioned, Mélenchon, that perhaps this would be his best bet, that he's more likely to garner more votes, given the fact that he was one of the top 3 runner-ups in the first round of the presidential vote.
Well, he's trying to find a centrist approach to politics. You know, on one side you have the extreme right, on the other side you have this left-wing bloc that has been formed, and President Macron is trying to position himself in the mainstream center, more to the center right than to the center left, definitely, and that has been his asset since 2017. He's trying to portray himself as the one who's reinventing politics. There is a big change in French politics and in many European countries at the same time. The traditional parties have almost collapsed. You know, in France we had 2 governing parties that had an alternatively in power for the past 4 decades, and they have collapsed completely in the past few years, and certainly in the last elections. So in this new landscape that has appeared, President Macron still has a chance to position himself as the reasonable center of French politics.
So if the Socialist Party and the hard left LFI have formed an agreement of some sort of coalition, how do they envisage the Parliament particularly bringing about or manifesting their policies and dreams?
They have created a platform where 4 political parties have united on a certain number of demands and a program, particularly on social issues. That's their main asset. They criticize, they want to cancel this decision or this program by President Macron to postpone the retirement age. They want to increase the minimum wage. They have a number of social points in their program which they think might help them to win the election. We have a situation in France where the Constitution allows the president and the government to be of different parties. We've had that twice in the past, where the president and the prime minister were not from the same parties. This is creating some tension, but it has worked, and that's what the left-wing bloc is trying to do this time, to impose a left-wing majority in parliament that President Macron would have to deal with, and therefore postpone some of his most controversial demands.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us about the inauguration of French President Emmanuel Macron earlier on, and some of the major issues that he highlighted. That there was Pierre Husky speaking to us. He is a journalist and co-founder of Who 89.